So, the translations are out for My Hero Academia Manga chapter 364, and in this video we're just going to do a little bit more discussing about what's going on in this chapter involving All For One, and potentially what's going on with EDGESHOT, and does it make any sense for the story. So, let's talk about that. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy Manga Man Drew, and I'm here to do my discussion for My Hero Academia Manga chapter 364. In this video, like I said, we're going to be discussing some of the differences between the official and unofficial translations for this week, see what the official translations got right versus what the unofficial translations got wrong, and just dive a little bit more into probably the most controversial part of this chapter, and that is involving EDGESHOT, and pointing out a few things that I might have missed along the way. So let's dive right into it. For starters, one point of difference between the official and unofficial translations comes from Dr. Garaki's speech at the beginning of the chapter, and how in the unofficial translations, it seems as if they did get some things wrong about who is speaking and what is being said in this moment. For instance, he brings up this idea that the ability for Eri to reverse causality is something that All For One knew about prior to being put in jail, but this doesn't make any sense. But it is corrected in the official translation as this being something that All For One talked about, and how it involves certain things falling into place as it being fate. And another difference coming from this speech and how this indication is that this is all pre-recorded, but another difference comes from when he's talking about All For One and sort of in a way confessing his love and admiration for him, and how in the unofficial translation he talks about how he sincerely hopes that hatred would not dwell in your heart. But in the official translation, he actually wishes and asks for his own heart in reference to All For One be filled with hate. And this makes a lot more sense in the official translation than in the unofficial translation, because we know for a fact that One For All being obtained by All For One was able to not be done because All For One himself did not have hatred in his heart, which is why he needed Shigaraki and Shigaraki's hatred as a way of trying to obtain One For All. So it makes more sense that the doctor would be hoping that All For One had hatred in his heart in a way of hoping that it was actually All For One obtaining One For All and not necessarily this new version of Shigaraki. So it just makes more sense with the relationship in the official translation than in the unofficial translation. And one slight difference comes from how he talks about how he understands the human body, and one is indicating that he's able to know how the human body works in the unofficial translation, while in the official translation, he just has experiences understanding how it goes on in their body. And these differences aren't that significant when it comes to what he's going to do, but the actual big significant change comes at the end of the chapter. Because pretty much what he says to Mirko and everyone else is pretty much the same between both translations, but what is different is what he says to Best Jeanist, how he's going to help Bakugo's heart. Because in the unofficial translation, he says that he's going to repair what is lacking and have Bakugo move. But in the official translation, he says that he shall replace what is missing and make it pump. So with that difference in translation, it pretty much implies in the official translation that he is going to be the one pumping Bakugo's heart, and that Best Jeanist will not be involved in that at all. And that between both translations, they both confirm that he is going to become Bakugo's actual heart. And this is where a lot of the controversy comes in when it comes to this idea that this is not necessarily something that was foreshadowed or seen that EDGESHOT can actually do in the story. And to an extent, they're kind of right. Because something that I missed in this chapter because of the translations is that we get to see an image of both a young EDGESHOT and a young Best Jeanist, where they're apparently part of a club considered to be the Textile Arts Association. And this is very important, and something that I realized later on is that it kind of makes sense that EDGESHOT is able to turn himself into this string-like thread based off his quirk, but also based off how he names some of his techniques. Because another difference in translation, and it's very slight, it comes from how he names this final technique. In the unofficial translation, it's pretty much the same, except instead of saying zenith, he says extreme. But the point that I want to bring up is the actual naming of the technique, Ninpo 1000 Sheet Pierce. The pierce part isn't what's important, it's the 1000 sheet that matters. Because when it comes to EDGESHOT's quirk Folder Body, it grants the user the ability to manipulate the thinness of their body as well as stretch their limbs. And the context for why he's able to transform his body into those thread-like structures may come from the fact that he named some of his super moves Thousand Sheets. Because when it comes to sheets, it could be in reference to the fact that he can make himself super thin like paper, or that it's in relationship to sheets, which is like pieces of cotton or other fabric. And that's the relationship that we need to bring up when it comes to how he's able to do this. That he's able to literally transform his organic body into thread-like substances. And that potentially because he's able to do that, that is the explanation for why he's able to repair parts of the body, because he can literally transform himself into those parts of the body. And that he's not necessarily, most likely, just recreating everything new, but it's just filling in the gaps with his body. And that it's very likely that he can do it even though his body proportions are a lot larger than Bakugo's, because he can turn himself into thread, and because he can make himself flat and able to fold himself in different ways to fit into Bakugo's body, and for the most part, repair his heart, probably to the best of its ability or greater. So yeah, I've gotten a little bit more accustomed or accepting of what he was able to do, even though I still do not believe that it's executed the best or is something that was necessarily foreshadowed earlier on in the series in comparison to Best Jeanist. Because I think that it probably would have been better executed if Best Jeanist was the one to actually fix the heart, and that EDGESHOT was the one that could contribute but not necessarily sacrifice his life for it. But I'm more accepting of it because of how well it ties into the themes of how far heroes will go. And I think that there's this discourse or this idea in the community that EDGESHOT is this kind of C-list, low-level side character in the story, and that he has never played an important part in the story. But that's not necessarily the case. He has been a part of this story. If not a prominent part of the story, he has been a prominent character in the story because of the fact that he is a hero, a part of one of the top 10 heroes. And we've literally seen him doing a fair amount throughout the story, from Kamino to Pro Hero to the war. He isn't as prominent as other heroes such as Endeavor and Hawks, but he's significantly more prominent than characters such as Crust and Mashuda, the samurai guy. So I think people are really underestimating and undermining when it comes to EDGESHOT as a character in the story, and making him seem a lot less important than what the story has portrayed him to be. So, something that I really want to discuss and have a theory on is, why is EDGESHOT specifically the one needed to fix Bakugo's heart? Why couldn't it have been Best Jeanist to do the exact same thing? And why EDGESHOT did not need to necessarily sacrifice his life to do it? And I think that most likely what this is going to lead to is that Bakugo is going to get another kind of power up. And if we assume that the reasoning why his heart exploded is because of the explosions coming out of his body and being too stressful on his heart, causing it to rupture, if he gets a new heart, then in theory, he could still go full throttle with his quirk without the risk of his heart exploding. And I say this because we have no concrete evidence on whether or not the explosion that occurred came directly from Bakugo's heart and the stress that his body was being put on his heart, or the fact that Bakugo literally had an entire hole blown in by his chest by Shigaraki's attack. So it's not definitive to say which is which, but you could assume that it is because of the stress that Bakugo's body was putting on his heart, because we see that this happens before we see the hole being punched in his chest. So I think what is happening is that the reasoning why EDGESHOT needs to make Bakugo a new heart is so that he can go full power without the restriction of his body being forcefully bombarded with this explosion force, causing his heart to rupture. And that his heart may begin to rupture when we see it next time, but because EDGESHOT is becoming a new heart for him, it won't explode, which will allow him to actually fight longer and more without necessarily dying. And that this could lead to Bakugo fighting in this fight a lot longer and a lot better than probably any of the other pro heroes currently. So I think that the reasoning why it had to be EDGESHOT is that there may be something that we're going to see in the next few chapters that's going to explain why and how EDGESHOT specifically was able to do this. And it ties into the thematic relevance of how far heroes are willing to go to save a life, especially in the case of Bakugo, who is literally the only character in this entire fight as of now who was able to do a lot, if not a significant amount of damage on Shigaraki in this moment. So yeah, I also could talk a little bit more about All For One and his character, but I think that I did a decent amount of job of doing that in the actual review. So if you want to get my opinions and my thoughts on All For One as a character, go watch that video. Or I may make a separate video on All For One and his character later on in the future. But yeah, this is all I really want to say about this chapter. Hopefully you enjoyed this chapter discussion. What do you think? Do you still think that when it comes to EDGESHOT, it's a little bit still more of an asshole? Or do you think that you're a little bit more okay with it like I am? Leave your thoughts down in the comments down below. Leave a like on the video if you like this type of content. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!